if you thought this world was real, well, all you had to do was meet a prophet. And the prophet, just like, and then he's like, Ko Amar Hashem, thusly says the Lord. And you're just like, oh my gosh. Let's just say there are 24 of you walking around. Now, it could be some of them are in the soul world right now.
You mean that's how many generations?
If you do perfect math, at all times, there's 24 of you.
24 do you Google them?
No, 24 of you. It's just that you, what's your name? Yocheved. You and, what's your name? What? You and Gitti could have the same exact soul. It's just that you went through your life with your parents and your neighborhood and everything you went through, and Gitti went through her life and her parents. And so each of you have your own narrative of your experience of life, and each of you have your own body and your own character traits and stuff. Those are unique to you. But the soul itself, you share.
At the same lifetime?
And there's about 21 others of those.
In the same lifetime?
Yeah, with 21 others. Yeah, so now there are tzaddikim who are made up of much more than 23. You have probably 23 hanging around, but all 23, let's imagine these are the 23. Let's imagine these are the 23, but my arm could be one person who's all 23. Sorry, that wasn't good. How would I put it? I guess in a visual, I can maybe do it like this, is that okay, and they're all connected to this. This is the soul. Okay, this is the soul, and now obviously there'd be 23 of those. Yeah, and then but that all starts again up here with this soul, who could be connected to a whole other, till you can have, like, for example, Moses was the sum total of all the souls of Israel. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai included all the souls. That's why when we light a yortzeit candle for Rabbi Shimon, we make bonfires, because it's this. Whereas one candle for someone who passed away, it's a bonfire for someone who passed away. The reason we all make that pilgrimage to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's grave on his yortzeit, which makes no sense in the world. Half the people don't even know what they're doing there. Like, go interview some Moroccan guy wearing a jalbia, and ask him, what is he doing dancing around drunk on Mount Meron? Every log building there. And you ask him what he's doing there, he'd just be like, I don't know. We're just all drawn there. Meanwhile, you got 300,000, you have 750,000 people drawn to this place. And ask any of them where Hillel is buried. Everyone's heard of Hillel. Not everyone's heard of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai unless you're raised observant. But almost every Jew's heard of Hillel. Ask anyone on the mountain where Hillel is buried. Do you know where Hillel is buried? 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 You know where Hillel? He knows where Hillel is buried. You know where Hillel is buried? You know where Hillel is buried? He's buried about a 35-second walk from the cave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And probably not a single person's buried visiting him. And if anything, there's probably a couple of Nanach guys camped out in his cave there. There's it's just ignored. And the reason is because Hillel was a great rabbi. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of these sum total souls that we're all coming off of. We're all directly linked to him. His soul was our soul. Vayaminu v'Hashem u'v'Moshe avdoi. They believed in God and in Moses, his servant, and meaning that Moses was just this soul of all of Israel. He was the soul of Israel. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the soul of Israel. By the way, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, just so you understand his place in history, is very important to understand, is that before Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there were prophets. So if you had any doubt that, if you ever thought this world was real and not a digital simulation, that this is just an illusion, If you thought this world was real, well, all you had to do was meet a prophet. And the prophet, just like, and then he's like, Ko Amar Hashem, thusly says the Lord. And you're just like, oh my gosh. And everyone around them, their hair stands up and you're all having this full-on mystical experience around this prophet. So there was no Jew in the world who thought the world was real. Everyone knew we're part of this simulation that gets messages straight through citizens of Israel. Because we were a nation of prophets. But what happened? Prophecy ended. Because of our sages. Our sages are the ones who did it to us. And it was for a good reason. The sages prayed that God should remove the power of idolatry from the world. It used to be that idolatry was so powerful that you couldn't stay away from it. It would literally suck you in like internet. Idolatry had this power over people. It was like social media. You just couldn't put it down. And therefore Shabbat was like Shabbat versus WhatsApp? Or you know how many kids raised observant have a terrible test today between Shabbat versus Instagram? You know what a challenge that is for so many Jews who were raised totally observant. And no one knew that smartphones were going to take Shabbos out for thousands and thousands of young people who could not survive the what's the word I'm looking for? Not very articulate today. Temptation. They weren't going to survive that temptation. Thank you. And that was what idolatry was. And our sages said, we're never going to survive with this idolatry business. They prayed to God, take idolatry out of the world. And God listened. He took idolatry out of the world. And prophecy disappeared. Because they're connected. Idolatry and prophecy are connected. And when we lost idolatry, thank God, idolatry went, the power of idolatry, not that people don't serve idols, but it doesn't have the power it did. And so too we lost prophecy through that. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes on the scene right after the prophets pass away. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes and reveals the Zohar. And the Zohar brings the understanding that this is a digital simulation. It's an entire manifesto of how the world actually, on like great detail, is a digital simulation, that none of this world's real. And that was meant to last, by the way. What Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai brought to the world with the Zohar was meant to last till Mashiach came. Except it didn't. It unfortunately, it got badly crushed by Europe and everything that we went through in Europe, and then the Industrial Revolution. There was a lot of trouble happened. And then the worst, the nail in the coffin of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his dream that it would last till Mashiach. The nail in the coffin was a man by the name of Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi was a false messiah who used the Zohar to learn how to do what's called practical kabbalah, which is matter manipulation. He could manipulate matter, and then he went on to pretend, or perhaps he believed that he was the Messiah, got millions of followers, brought them even to Israel to like rebuild the temple. Do you know about this? This is like 500 years ago. And he brought them to Israel to rebuild the temple, millions. And it turned out that Shabtai Tzvi was, the Turks are like, who is this guy? And the Turks just took him. And that was it, like death or whatever, Islam or whatever. And he disappears. And all the Jews are like, huh? And they just that it was one of the biggest blows to the Jewish world ever. What happened was that there was such a backlash against Kabbalah after that there began this Ashkenazi movement called the rationalist movement. And that's why you might meet people called Litvoks. You ever heard of the word Litvoks? Litvoks, today they're called Yeshivashit, because no one's really a Litvok anymore, but there are people called Yeshivashit. Yeshivashit people are people who, unless you have X-ray vision, you wouldn't know they're spiritual, but you would know that they know a lot of Torah. Okay? And they're not obviously spiritual, but they may be. And believe me, I know some who are extremely spiritual, but you'd never guess it. Like they're extremely covered up in their spiritual path. And which is kind of good for them, because then as individuals, you can be like the most spiritual person ever, and no one would ever know it. They would just never know, because you're dressed in a business suit, you got a tie, you just look like you can't tell if you're going to synagogue or you're going to a meeting in Midtown Manhattan. at a bank. But they have very secret spiritual lives, these people. But the main thing that they were known for at the very beginning was rationalism. Everything has to be rational. Now, really, they were secretly very spiritual, because it wasn't like they removed resuscitation from the dead in the second bracha of Shmoneh Esrei. Is that very rational? No. Resuscitation of the dead? Not very rational. They did not get rid of that. And they didn't get rid of any of the other things either. And their leaders studied Kabbalah and stuff. You understand? These are the secretly spiritual people who went with this rationalist position. And they even made rules that people can only learn Kabbalah not before they're 40 years old, with a solid understanding of all the rest of Torah. They have to be married with children, grounded. But the problem is, if you're overly grounded, what might happen? You bite the dust. And so, unfortunately, things were so grounded that the rabbis of the generation looked around and said, like, wait a second, if you're a scholar, you're spiritual, but if you're not a scholar, which was 97% of Jews, then you start to forget you're even connected to God, that you're even created in God's image, that you're special, that you're worth anything. You start to feel like the average European, which was like a nothing. And after a while, Judaism starts to turn south. Like, you start to lose your Judaism, because think about it. Who really keeps Judaism in the end? It's people with a sense of self-worth. If you have good self-worth, you'll probably keep Judaism. If your self-worth starts to tank, you'll probably not be keeping Judaism too well. And we've noticed here at Eshet Torah, the last 30 years I've been here, that there's a direct correlation between the secular guys who walk in, who have high self-worth, versus the people who have low self-worth. The ones with the high self-worth generally get traction here, and the ones with low self-worth generally fall away. Now, there's deep reasons why. I've been speaking about it in my last few classes. We're not going to talk about it now. But the self-worth tanked because no one was really scholars, and Kabbalah is out the window, and now you can't really talk about the soul much. But if you don't talk about the soul much, you lose your spirituality. Because the only thing that's spiritual about you is your soul. Your body is not spiritual. Your body is flesh. It's meat. Yeah, you're a walking piece of meat with a soul. And if you don't have a good relationship with that soul, which you'd only have a relationship with that soul if there's some Kabbalah being taught. But what happened, it began the rationalist movement, and with the rationalist movement, many rabbis, great Kabbalists, looked around and said, we've got to pick it up. We got to pick this generation up. And that first person who did that was named the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov, who later, he was hidden at first, then he was revealed, and then he had some students. There's one great story that there was rumors all around Europe that there's this miracle man. And since Shabtai Tzvi, this was the first miracle man since Shabtai Tzvi. So people were like really leery of this miracle man. And they were not happy about the miracle man. And one of the great rationalists was he was the Gadol Ador of an entire region of Europe. And his name, what was the Maggid's name? What was the Maggid's name? Anyone know what his name was? Dov Ber? So his name was Dov Ber. He was the rabbi of an entire region. And he got tired of meeting people who were stopping by Mezrich, not Mezrich at the time, but they were stopping by his town where he lived on their pilgrimage to meet this miracle man called the Baal Shem Tov. And he didn't like it. He was tired of it. And he said, that's it. I'm going to go meet him myself. Now, the people in the community were like, you're going to what? He said, well, I'm going to go check it out. We got to be responsible. Let's see. Maybe we have to put an end to him. And so he disappeared. Now, going far away from where he didn't live there, near there. So it was a couple weeks journey to get to him. I forget where he was and what region he was. And then he needed several weeks back, plus he needed time with the Baal Shem Tov himself. Anyway, he comes back months later. And there's a big fanfare. The Gadol Ador is back in town, the great of the generation. They usher him in. It's a big festivity. They bring him into his home. And all the greats are sitting around, all the Torah greats are sitting around the table, and they're bringing out l'chaims, and they're bringing out food and fruit and stuff. And so they all get quiet and they say, what did you discover? And he said that I found out that there's a God. And they all looked at him like, what? You found out there's a God? He says, yeah, I found out there's a God. And meanwhile, the Gentile housekeeper in the house was on her way out with a big platter of fruit. And one of the rabbis interrupts her on her way in and says, in front of everybody, he says to the lady, who knows what her name was. What's a good Russian woman's name?
Olga.
Olga, thank you. We'll go with Olga. Olga, where did this fruit come from? And she says, it came from the kitchen. He says, and before the kitchen, it came from the store. And before the store, it came from the farm. And before the farm, where did it come? It came from the trees. And before the trees, where did it come from? She says, it came from the seed. And before the seed, where did it come from? And then she stands there a little stunned and says, it came from God. And they turned back to this great leader of the generation and said to him, the Gentile servant says there's a God. And the rabbi says, she says, I know. Now, why am I telling you all this? Oh, is that there was having prophets around to remind you that this world's a simulation. But then the prophets disappeared. There was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai with the Zohar to let you know the world's in a simulation. But then came Shabtai Tzvi. And then came along the Hasidic masters to let you know that this world is just a simulation. And then came along the Holocaust. And later came along the internet and digital world and basically in the 1960s came the psychedelic era, hit the world. And though I'm sure none of you ever experienced psychedelics, nevertheless you inherited a world. Not if you were raised observant, but if you weren't raised observant, you were born and raised in a world of parents who know that this world's a digital simulation firsthand. Not because there was a great rabbi who was telling you about, a simulation, not because of prophets and not because of the Zohar, but because they themselves have had their own personal mystical experience just from having eaten a mushroom. And that's the world we live in. And that's why you'll notice that Hollywood can't stop making films about the world being a digital simulation. And people really feel that way. And they've even taken polls of how many people think the world's real, how many people think the world's a digital simulation after all. And you'll see that a lot of people actually believe the world's a digital simulation today.
I understand what you mean by the Rashbi, let us know the world is a simulation.
The Zohar is all about how God created the world, and as you study that, you'll start to realize the world's a digital simulation. But I have a lot of Kabbalah classes on this that are recorded live. You can watch them.
What it means that the world is a simulation?
It just, in a nutshell, it means that the world was created via light, and that light was obscured by worlds. And what's left when you obscure light with the worlds is you get a strobing effect. You understand? It creates a strobe of an on-off type strobe where I'm filtering out that flow of light, strobing it into creation, something from nothing into creation at all times. So what that means though is once you have a strobing effect, meaning you have light filtered out into this world, that means that everything's going to have its own frequency. So wood has a frequency, like a wood table, or wool's going to have a frequency. Colors are frequencies. They now know all the digital. Obviously, they know digital color, or you wouldn't be able to, see a photo today. Photos are all digital today, which is just there's a number that is purple. There's an actual number that's purple. Today, when we buy these LED lights, it actually comes with, I think, it comes with numbers like 3,000 is more yellow, 6,000 is more white. These are frequencies, and they are colors. They even have taste now digitized. Did you know they digitize taste? And all the rabbis want to know, what happens when you have 1 in 60, do you taste it? And they said yes. And what happens if you have 1 in 61, do you taste it? And the answer is you don't. Meaning digitally, there is, Bata Bashishim actually is a digital reality, which is an amazing thing. So They now have taste digitized. Sight's for sure digital. Everything you're seeing. What?
Even fragrance.
Fragrance for sure, yeah. Everything's digitized today. And yeah, it's really quite fascinating. But this all was very important to understand. It wasn't just the psychedelic community. At the same time, the psychedelic community of the 60s in North America did their thing. At the same time, the physicists were understanding that everything's made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. It's just the question is their frequencies of how fast they're moving. And they have lasers there's a laser that you could shoot right through this board without touching the board and burn the wall on the other side. Because the frequency that they have the laser shooting at will burn wood, but it won't burn the formica here.
I understand.
It'll dance between the raindrops of the formica without hurting the board and burn a hole in the wood behind it. Because there's holes in everything. The world's made primarily out of space. And this is all a digital simulation. So the world now finally knows this. Like the world gets this. And these are mystical secrets that were kept in tribal traditions throughout the world and through Kabbalah, through our tradition. These are mystical secrets that have been always kept in the tribes of the world, which are now considered common knowledge. Common knowledge, meaning everything that the prophets were doing and everything all those traditions were doing simultaneously in those days is now become common knowledge. So we are extremely close to a revelatory period, extremely close to a revelation. We don't know how that's going to come out, and we don't know what the timing is. And like Bob Marley, Oliver Sholem said, we've got to fulfill the book. Yeah, that he says in a redemption song, no coincidence, it's called the Redemption Song. Yeah, some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. We got to finish the prophecies. There's more prophecies left, and we're not done with them all. But most of them are almost done with, and there's a little more left. And once we're done with those, so then that revelation